So I want to give you a 3-word phrase, and then we're going to talk about each of those words individually. That's going to help you to overcome sales objections in a way that makes sense. It's easy to understand, easy to remember, and hopefully very successful for you. It's certainly been very successful for me over the years. Okay, so the 3 words that I want to give you are feel, felt, found. Hi everyone, it's Allison Williams here, and welcome to another episode of the Crushing Chaos with Law Firm Mentor podcast, where today we are going to talk about overcoming sales objections. So this is one of these topics that comes up time and time again, and I never get tired of talking about it because it is the key for you to create a scalable law firm. In order to have any thriving business, we all have to have sales. And I know that that is a word that triggers a lot of lawyers. A lot of folks don't like to think of themselves as a salesperson, but the reality is if you are not trading your legal expertise for money, you are not in business, okay? You might be in practice, you might be in service, right? Being in practice, you can do all the pro bono work in the world, but you can't eat that pro bono work if it's not attached to a fee. So it's really important that you think of yourself as having a need to learn and master sales in your law firm, whether through you or through others. Now, I always like to start with the idea that whenever we talk about sales, that no matter who you outsource it to, you as the owner of the company need to know how to sell. Because you need to know whether or not the people that you've employed in that role, whether you hire attorneys who are dedicated to selling, whether the attorneys that are delivering the legal service are selling in your law firm, or whether you hire a non-attorney. It doesn't really matter. Whoever you have employed in that role needs to know that you understand how the process works and are good enough at the process that you are not beholden to them. Now, what I mean by that is there's kind of a dirty little thought out there that I think a lot of law firm owners have, that there's somehow going to be a coup that if I build the law firm of my dreams, that if I am not working 90 hours a week, not tethered to my desk, not stuck in a brick and mortar if I don't want to be, not having to do drudgery of cases that I don't enjoy, that if I actually have built something that I thoroughly enjoy, that brings me life satisfaction and financial success, that my employees are going to look at me sideways and they're going to be jealous and they're going to overthrow me. And I think there is even more fear of that now in light of what's kind of happening in the U.S. landscape. You know, we had that very tragic story of the United Healthcare CEO who was murdered recently. And there was quite an interesting uprising online. And I think a lot of the uprising was about our healthcare system in general, even though it was directed at this individual, which I think is unfortunate. But this idea that the people at the top are the ones who are oppressing, the people who are not at the top are the ones who are oppressed, and anyone who has the title of CEO or the title of leader or the title of boss or whatever you call yourself is inherently the ire of all of their employees. And I don't think that that's true. I don't think that even if you think about your own company, I don't think that for most of us that our employees walk around in resentment of us. Now, it does take you having some degree of a fine-tuned gut to be able to assess that, right? You might not have the most emotional intelligence and you might not necessarily be tuned into your employees, but there are ways to find that out, right? But for most of us, the coup that we are afraid of really comes in the idea of hiring a crackerjack lawyer who comes in, does a great job, builds a big book of business, and then takes off in the middle of the night with all of our clients. You know, that doesn't happen anywhere near as frequently as it gets talked about. But I think when it happens, it's such a traumatic thought for most of us that a lot of lawyers don't even desire to build a law firm because they're so afraid of losing it. And I think that that is unfortunate. And there are lots of different ways that you can guard yourself against that, including learning how to sell, right? Because if every client in my law firm walked out tomorrow with a lawyer that I currently employ or otherwise, I would be able to go to market and sell the next person, the next person, the next person Would it be painful if I had to start at zero from having hundreds of clients? Of course, but I certainly could do it, right? It isn't fatal to my law firm. It might be a hiccup on the road, but it is not fatal. And in order to have that kind of power, you have to learn how to sell. And the number one challenge that people get into, they're able to master the conversation of sales, right? For most of our clients, most of our law firm mentor clients, and even folks that are in our membership, we have the Essentials Plus membership where you can get access to our sales coach, Tony Lay, and you can come in and learn about sales strategy, sales mastery, management, all of those things, right? You can come in, and a lot of times what we see of the people that come into the membership even is that there is this reticence around the tail end of the conversation. But the conversation itself, if you practice it enough, you practice the cadence, you practice the tone, you can get into the habit of learning how to sell. And that actually becomes somewhat fun, right? When you learn how to do it and it becomes more natural. But what is almost universally the challenge is what we're going to talk about today, which is overcoming sales objections. Okay. So I want to give you a 3-word phrase, and then we're going to talk about each of those words individually. That's going to help you to overcome sales objections in a way that makes sense, that's easy to understand, easy to remember, and hopefully very successful for you. It certainly it's certainly been very successful for me over the years. Okay, so the 3 words that I want to give you are feel, felt, found. Okay, now some of you have heard this before. If you have, I hope that you still tune in because we're going to put a little different spin on it. But feel, felt, found is the way to shift your conversation from being an adversarial conversation into being a collaborative one. Okay, what you want to avoid when someone objects to your ask, right? You've gotten all the way through the sales conversation. You're at the point of the close and you ask the person, so are you ready to move forward? And the person says, oh, I don't know. I think I need to speak to my spouse, right? Objection. Well, if you counter with what you might be thinking, which is, you don't need to speak to your spouse to make this decision. Don't you have the right to decide what happens with your paycheck? Right? You might have that thought. You would not say that thought, right? Because you would not want to disagree with your prospect. That is the number one thing you are trying to avoid in the course of your sales conversation, but most importantly, in the course of dealing with an objection. Because as soon as you have guided your person all the way to the finish line and you are at the point of close, you two are on the same side. But when they object, they move themselves to another side, right? They move themselves away from you. And your goal is to move them back to you so that you two are back to being on the same side. If you continue to disagree, right? They've disagreed with what you've asked for. If you now disagree with what they have said, i.e., of course you don't need to speak to a spouse, or of course you can afford the service, or of course you can move forward today and not have to wait a month. Right? You've immediately put yourself in a defensive posture with a person. That person does not want to hear more from you at that point. That person wants to defend him or herself. You don't want your prospect to have to defend him or herself against what you have to say. You want them always leaning into you as the trusted advisor, right? When we talk about sales, we talk about you becoming the trusted advisor. And because you are already in the status of being an attorney, you have an elevated status in society. A whole lot of lawyer jokes say otherwise, but generally speaking, lawyers are thought of highly in our society. So as a result, you already have an elevated status. You use that status in your sales conversation, and you continue to use it as the trusted advisor when you are walking them through an objection. Okay, you don't want to deviate from that. But you have to use this particular technique in order to shift them back to your side of the table. So let's talk about it. Feel, felt, found. First up, feel. Okay, so when someone says, I don't know if I really want to go forward now, it's a lot of money, right? That's a common objection, especially for legal services. Then what you would say is, I understand how you feel. Okay. Now, do you have to use the words, I understand how you feel? No, but you want to connote that. You're trying to convey empathy, agreement, and validation. Okay. That's what you need to accomplish in your immediate response, right? How you convey that becomes a matter of choice of words. There are lots of different words you can use, but I want you to keep feel in your mind as I understand how you feel. Why is that important? Well, again, you want to not disagree with your prospect, but most importantly, you want to have them hear you validate what they have to say. Because most of the time when people disagree, they are already on guard for you to disagree back with them, right? That's why we call it a disagreement, right? We're not together. We're not on the same page. We don't see it eye to eye. You have said something. They have disagreed. They're expecting a counter. You don't want to counter. You want to immediately validate what they have to say by saying, I understand how you feel, right? And you want to do that with a tone and an affect and an energy that legitimately tells them you understand how they feel, okay? If you say, I understand how you feel, and then you start disagreeing with them, you're not going to accomplish the goal, right? Again, empathy, agreement, and validation, that has to be conveyed when you have that conversation and you start off objecting or responding to their objection. All right, next up is felt. Okay, so we've said, I understand how you feel. The next thing you want to say is, others have felt the same way, okay? Other clients of ours have felt the same way. Now, why is this important? Well, the first thing that you are doing when you say others, right, is you are making a communal experience out of an isolated experience, okay? Because again, you have authority, and by virtue of having other people hear you and know your status as lawyers, your prospective client is going to think of you as a leader, and they're going to give you a higher status. You are immediately taking them out of the vulnerable position of disagreeing with an authority and putting them into a category with a host of other people. And that safety in numbers actually matters, okay? I'm sure you all have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I talk about it periodically on this podcast. But one of the things that we know about human behavior is that we all feel safer when there are others around us, okay? And around us doesn't have to mean physically around us. It means around our idea, right? There is a reason why people tend to go with the flow when there are a host of folks saying, hey, I like X. Even if you're the only person in the room that does not like X, you are more likely to say you like it if other people are saying they like it. Well, why is that? Because we all have a need for acceptance by the tribe, okay? Just thinking back to prehistoric days, if we wandered off from the tribe, we were going to die, right? We're much more likely to be eaten by a lion or a gazelle or whatever if there is one of us out there on the prairie than if there are hundreds of us all around. That would most likely intimidate the animal not to come over to us. And if the animal does come over to us, they can't get us all, right? We have the opportunity to make a run for it. So that mindset is still very much hardwired in how we think as humans. And most humans are going to feel more comfortable knowing that other people will oftentimes agree with or feel the same way as they do. So it's important that you think about it that way, that you are trying to get them to recognize that they are in a collective popularity contest with other people, right? Who is the most desired in this group? Well, you disagree, so do they, right? There is no competition. You're all on the same page. That's the beautiful thing. And by virtue of you doing that, you're acknowledging a weakness in your positioning, right? Just by virtue of you saying, others have felt the same way as you do, you are saying, well, I said I want you to do X, and others had said no, just like you said no, okay? Well, what does that do? That immediately takes you down to the ordinary, right? Right? We've talked about the idea of how oftentimes we look for heroes, and Whether you are serving as the hero in the story, guiding your prospective client over the finish line to getting what they need, i.e. the representation they need, or you are the villain in the story who is standing between them and the service that they need because you are not giving it to them at the price that they want, becomes a matter of perception. And the way that you get to be the hero is you get to lean into that status you already have. Remember that elevated status you have. But in leaning in, you also get to be both extraordinary because you are the high status person, but also ordinary, right? There is something about our needing to connect with whoever it is that we're selling on a level that makes us feel like they know us, right? This is my kind of person. This is somebody who gets me. This is not somebody who looks down on me. This is somebody who understands me. Well, again, you've already created that empathy, agreement, and validation when you said, I understand how you feel. And now you are shifting into the communal stage of others felt the same way, right? You're making it safe for the person to disagree with you, which is making you a more likable person. The other thing to consider is that you are stroking the person's ego, right? When you say to a person, others have felt the same way, you're further validating what they have to say, but you are also doing so in a way that, again, makes them feel superior, okay? Now, by superior, I don't mean arrogance. We're not talking narcissism, right? But superior in the sense that there is already kind of a cowing that will happen when a person disagrees with an expert, right? The expert says, I should do X, and I am disagreeing, right? They're pulling away from you in that stance. Now you want to bolster and have them pull closer to you. And that tends to happen when you start to, again, make it into a communal experience. Oh, yeah, plenty of people have felt that, right? Of course. Again, further validation, but also ego stroking. Smart people feel this way. Right? A whole group of smart people who are now my clients felt this way. They made this exact same objection that you did. They had the exact same thoughts that you did. Now, you don't want to stay there. The last thing that you want to do is our third letter, our third word, which is found, right? So we had feel, felt, and now we're at found. When we say found, the statement you're going to make is, however, what our clients have found when they start to work with us is XYZ, okay? Now, I'm saying XYZ right now because I don't know what it is the person has specifically objected to beyond the price, right? We know that in this instance, we start with a price objection. I don't know what would shift in this particular sales conversation the price from being one that feels really high to one that feels more reasonable. Okay. So you have to think about what you have shared so you can know what's going to come at that ellipsis, right? What others have found when they start to work with us is ... right? That ... has to be filled in with something meaningful to the conversation that you've had with the prospect. Now, here is the Jedi ninja trick. Ideally, this form of overcoming objections has happened throughout your sales conversation. The first time you address an objection should not be at the close, okay? The first time you hear an objection shouldn't be at the close. You should presume certain objections are naturally going to come up based on what you're selling and based on what you might know about your prospective client. Okay. And the great thing is that if you are addressing their objections as the conversation is unfolding, it becomes a lot easier than at the end to close, right? You don't start getting a lot of stammering, a lot of backing up, a lot of running away. Doesn't mean that you won't get objections at the point of asking when you do the call to action and you ask for the sale. Doesn't mean that you won't actually get objections, but the objections will be easier to overcome if you have been addressing them as you go. So ideally, you've worked it into the conversation how you have had similar clients express certain things, that you understand how they feel, that many clients have felt the same way as that particular person, right? We call that person the case study, right? So you want to build in case studies to your sales conversation. Again, Jedi Ninja trick. And then finally, but what our clients have found is the way that we handle XYZ allows them to. Or what we have found is when our clients start the process of funding litigation, it is easier for them to manage when we manage it this way, right? That might go into the structure of your pricing and things like that. But again, it's not a capitulation on the price. So it's important when you do the feel, felt, found that you work it into your normal nomenclature, right? So you have to think about how you might express, I understand how you feel. Other clients have felt the same way. But what our clients have found is when they start to work with us, XYZ is different for them. Okay. Now, the other thing that I want to just remind you about when you use this objection, it's really powerful. But a lot of people have said to me, it feels boxy. Like I don't normally talk this way. Or, of course, a person would expect me to disagree with them and would expect me to say, oh, no, it's not like that. So how do I avoid that tension, that push and pull that comes? And the way that you do that is by elucidating in each of those areas, right? So when you say, I understand how you feel, you don't immediately jump to other clients who felt the same way, right? You say, I understand how you feel. It's a big decision that you're making right now, and this is going to impact your finances, your life. Clearly, you're going to have to make some adjustments into the future. You're at a lot of risk right now, so I understand how terse that is for you, right? So you use your languaging around, I understand how you feel, to further validate, to further empathize, to further seek agreement with the person. Because you want the person to be coming over to you as that conversation is building, so that by the time you get to the end of found and you say, however, what our clients have found when they start to work with us is XYZ, you'll start to find that the person is nodding along, right? They're now in agreement with you because you have built up enough of a runway in the description that you're given to really lather on what the person needs, right? You're talking to somebody who is a high status person, that ego stroke is going to matter more. If you're talking to somebody who's really, really fearful, then I understand how you feel might be less important than others have felt the same way, right? That safety in numbers, tribal urge that they need might be greater for that person if they're a very fear-based person, right? And again, this is all going to evolve as you start having more sales conversations and as you start figuring out what works for you based on your tone and cadence and what works for the people to whom you are selling. All right, everyone, I'm Allison Williams. You have been listening to another episode of the Crushing Chaos with Law Firm Mentor podcast. I will see you on our next episode.